What's good, everybody, and welcome back to the channel for another episode of our Madden 23 San Antonio Express expansion draft only franchise. Now, you may have tuned into the episode and thought, wait a minute, stats and awards, the season's not over. You are right. We are here in week 17, but if we look at the schedule here, we're the 1 seed. And if we look deeper into the standings, we have already clinched the 1 seed. These last 2 games don't really matter, and I kind of want to do something in terms of diving deeper, I should say, into the stats. I made highlight reels for all of our main players. It took me forever to make. You've also probably noticed that we're not using Facecam for this episode. Typically, I just do Facecam for, the game reactions to, the Madden cheese and the exciting plays, just to see a reaction. That's, I think makes the gameplay more exciting. There is not going to be any gameplay this episode, so my beautiful, beautiful face would just be a distraction for the highlights that it honestly took me so long. I compiled highlights from the entire season, and I want to dive deeper into the stats of everyone and kind of discuss whether they're exceeding my expectations, meeting my expectations, or falling below expectation. And so doing that kind of requires almost like an episode unto itself, which we're kind of going to get here. In terms of the gameplay, we're just going to kind of speed through the games, speed through the upgrades. We will do our last positional deep dive for the draft, and then we'll get into the stats and awards after that. Here against the Seahawks, this game was never really in doubt. This team has turned into kind of a juggernaut in simulation. And the stats here, Brandon Nash had a good game. He did throw an interception, a rare one, just under 300 yards, 18 for 171 for Simmons. One of his better simulation games we've seen from him. Eddie Hazelton with over 100 yards. Jalen Turner with over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not a super big game from Lewis Smart. Timmy Reed had 4 sacks, and that's going to come into play later. So remember that he had 4 sacks in this game. A nice slate of upgrades after this game, just like a bunch of starting level players. So this is an exciting group of upgrades. We're going to start with Quincy Boston. He gets +3 man coverage, up to 94. He has really turned into a beast, and he's played like it this year, honestly. Going to continue with the pass protector upgrades for Brian Pearson. I'd like to get him to 90 pass protector. That's how you unlock the best offensive tackle abilities. +2 block shed for Victor Giles is nice. Morris Morgan, I'd like to make him a little bit more well-balanced. Let's give him a zone upgrade here. Just 1 zone, but 3 awareness. I mean, awareness is fine. Jaron Lacey here. He could stand a little bit of everything, but I think we'll focus maybe on just finesse and run stopping for him. He gets a block shed there. More upgrades after the weekly training. We're just simulating all this stuff so that we can actually have time to do all the highlights. I try to keep all of my episodes between 30 and 45 minutes, and I had to cut so many of the highlights just to get down to 45 minutes. I ended up looking at a lot of, players that I kind of had to take out of the episode too. I've seen that my views have gone up significantly if I shorten my videos a little bit, so I'm trying to do that. We'll do a power back here for Simmons. He's almost 99 in both power and elusive at the age of 23, which is kind of nutty. George McLean will get his second ability slot here, moving to 85, almost up to 90 finesse moves as well, which would give him his 5th pass rush slot. +3 deep route running, I should say, for Jalen Turner is exactly what we're looking for. going to finish the season against the Chargers. This is a very odd season in terms of the games that we played. We played the Chiefs twice in our division, but we didn't play the Broncos or the Chargers either time. It just so happens that the Broncos, it was kind of on accident. They were in week 2, and I like to play the opener, especially when it's, the first career game for a rookie quarterback. And then they were also the other opponent in a Chiefs episode, and I would rather play the Chiefs. And then the Chargers also were the other opponent in a Chiefs episode, and then this episode we decided not to play anybody. So rarely am I gonna not play one of the teams in our division. Very rarely am I not gonna play 2 of the teams in our division. George McLean with 2 sacks is very nice. Couple TFLs for Michael Franklin. Matthew Walker, perfect on the day. And we get a few more upgrades here. We had a lot of upgrades throughout this episode, simulating week 17 and 18. And we also simulated the wild card week. We'll do that at the end. I am voicing over a pre-recorded episode this time around. And yeah, we just got a ton of upgrades. It was really fun seeing pretty much our entire team get upgraded in this episode. Like Jaron Lacey, that's his second upgrade. Pretty sure Brandon Nash, this is his second upgrade in the episode. You love to see stuff like that. And Brandon Nash looks really good. Let's do our positional deep dive in the draft now. We will be doing the skill position players. Don't have any quarterbacks or running backs on our board, so we'll start with receiver. Floyd Gary. Yes, he's 23 years old, but he has the great to elite speed and acceleration. A spec catch, B deep route. Very much so Eddie Hazelton build. I would like to get another receiver in the fold. I don't know if it's going to be Floyd Gary, though. Just the fact that he's 23 years old and in the mold of a receiver we already have. I'm going to only give him a prospect rating of 2. Joey Vasquez here, however, 21 years old, 6'4", 233. The speed's not all the way there, but he has a lot of A's. Run block, short route, spec catch, carrying, catch in traffic, stiff arm, B awareness, B catching, B release. I mean, you got to love that he can kind of run block a little bit. He's got the size too. Maybe could even be a tight end in the future at 6'4", 233 with a run block. Just saying, probably not, because we need a receiver a lot more than we need a tight end right now. But we know that he's round 1 talent as well. He doesn't have the speed, but he is a good complement to Hazelton. Maybe you can say he has a very similar skill set to Jalen Turner. But Jalen Turner's a normal dev. I like him, but it's not going to keep me from drafting another receiver. Joey Vasquez receives a prospect rating of 4 out of 5 for me. Kevin Clemens, another guy, spectacular speed, good deep route running, not so much the short and medium. Hazelton type of build once again, but this one you can get later, a day 3 guy that we know is around 2 to 3 talent, so that's going to be like, what, a low 70s. I'd give him a prospect rating of 3. Chris Dawkins up next, 5'9", again, top end speed, B deep route, but he doesn't even have the spec catch. I think it's hard for me to give him more than a prospect rating of 2. Casey McDougal, another guy not with the speed so much, but we know he's got good talent. He's got some A's on the board. B, short and deep route running. He's terrible in the medium, but he's got both short and deep. It's not a skill set that I see a ton, so I'm interested in him. I'd give him a prospect rating of a 3. More like intrigued than super interested, because that is a very different skill set. If we don't end up with Joey Vasquez, Casey McDougal is probably the guy that I would target. If we do end up with Joey Vasquez, though, I don't know if I want 2 slower receivers on my team. I can handle 1, but 2, maybe that's a bit too much. So I guess Casey McDougal, his chances of being an express hinge on Joey Vasquez. Scotty George, We are back to scouting tight ends. He's got some speed. He looks like he can be a good run blocker. Luis Sanchez is up for contract next year. And I don't know how much he's going to be asking for, but I imagine it's going to be more than I want to pay a backup tight end because he's kind of good, honestly. He gets a 3. And here we go. Let's deep dive into the stats at the end of the year. Starting with Brandon Nash, who threw for 5,200 yards, 41 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He also ran for 593 yards and 12 touchdowns with 2 fumbles. So he had over 50 touchdowns with single-digit turnovers on the year. This is a guy that played awesome. He just when you draft a 97 speed quarterback, you expect a certain bit of talent on the ground, but he even exceeded my expectations. The ability to break off the long runs, to make a man miss, to get to the edge. He was an extremely fun quarterback to user. 12 rushing touchdowns is incredible. I've never played with a quarterback quite like Brandon Nash. And I usually play with more of the pocket style quarterbacks, honestly. I don't mind non-mobile quarterbacks, not necessarily non-mobile, but just not physical freaks. But I got to admit, playing with Brandon Nash was very fun. In terms of his throwing, he showed the ability to hit these tight window throws that you see here to Jalen Turner. And just very early on, you could see that he was going to be an upgrade over Devin Hamilton, even from throwing. Obviously, the upgrade at running was going to be apparent, but the upgrade as a thrower was also there. And it's hard to say that he's not one of the main reasons we jumped from 9-8 to 15-2. Much more consistent quarterback play, and that's what I love to see. He didn't hit every throw. Every now and then you'd see a throw on the run that kind of gets away from him, but you imagine that will develop with time. And here's one of the best throws of the year to Jackson. Now to Kevon Simmons. He had his career low in attempts this year, his second best year in yards, and his best year in touchdowns and with average. Also the most broken tackles. As far as a receiver, it was his worst year. Not by much. He's kind of always been in this range as a receiver, as we'll see him as a receiver to start off his highlight reel. It's hard to say that Kevon Simmons could surpass my expectations in terms of his stats because my expectations are sky high. Yet Kevon Simmons, to me, is like the perfect back. Once again, kind of like Nash, not the kind of player that I'm used to. Almost every Madden, I always have like 2 running backs. I like a power back and then a receiving / elusive back. I like to mix up the carries, maybe like a 60-40 split. Here, when you have the opportunity to add a player of Kevon Simmons' caliber, you just have to do it in the draft. And he has been so electric and fun to use. I mean, the speed to get to the edge just at any moment. His abilities both as an elusive and a power back. I'm so used to a running back being one or the other that I basically almost alternate game to game. Like, okay, this game I do a lot of jukes and spins and stuff. The next game I try to do a lot of stiff arms and trucks. I just need to remember that he can literally do everything. He is such an insanely talented player. And even though the receiving numbers were down, I felt like he was making plays downfield like you saw with that last episode. That last highlight. This run that we just saw right here, though, is best on the year. Eddie Hazelton here, 86 receptions is his second highest, 1,390 yards his second highest, and 6 touchdowns was his second lowest. That is a discrete decrease over last year, though. But in terms of his play, I don't feel like he was worse than last year. Maybe it was just in simulation he was less productive. But when you see a decrease in production like that from your wide receiver 1, it can be a little bit alarming, and maybe you think he is underperforming. But when you think of him as our second receiver, if you think of Lewis Smart, as I do, as our first receiver, and you think of him as a second weapon, what he does as a second option is perfectly fine with me. He does everything I ask. You see a deep shot down the sideline here. I wish we could hit this on a more consistent basis with him, but I think he's an excellent complement to Lewis Smart. I wish I could see a little bit more from him on the underneath routes. He has the speed to maybe get more after the catch, but we have so many good short route players in Sanchez and Smart and Turner that his deep ball ability is exactly what this offense needs. Hopefully we can just take more advantage of it as Nash gets better and as Hazelton continues to develop. Let's not forget, none of these guys are over 25 years of age, so all of them are still actually on the up and up. So despite the decreased production, he did not fail my expectations. Lewis Smart here, he tied his career high in receptions, his second best yards. I don't know if he'll ever catch his rookie season. We were force feeding the ball. 9 touchdowns is his second lowest, but he's another guy kind of like Simmons where I don't know if it's possible for him to exceed my expectations. I just think of him so incredibly highly. I've talked about him being, in my eyes, the best tight end since the second year of his career, even though it was his rookie year that he was actually the best. But he was also the best this year. He led all tight ends, as we'll see later, in catches and yards. He's just a beast. If I had one complaint about Lewis Smart is I felt like he had a few more drops this year than I'm used to seeing. And just on these drag routes, kind of like you've seen in this highlight reel, he's open. He just won't corral the ball. But the big playability on plays like that just far outweigh the occasional drop. And you definitely cannot forget his impact as a blocker as well. An elite blocker, an elite pass catcher. I have never played with a tight end as good as Lewis Smart. There's kind of a theme. I've never played with a running back like Simmons. I've never played with a quarterback like Nash. I've never played with a tight end like Smart. Most of the time, I build my offense through receivers, but it feels like good receivers are harder to get in Madden 23. And at least in this franchise, it's been the other positions that have actually been easier to get. So this team has completely changed the way I play offense. And on an offense with 2 different generational players, I still think Lewis Smart is my favorite guy on the team. That's wild to say, but I love this guy so much. Jalen Turner is a rookie who nearly got 1,000 yards on 68 receptions. Also led the team in receiving touchdowns with 12 on the year. He certainly exceeded my expectations. I drafted him to be the wide receiver 3 for our team. He quickly emerged as the wide receiver 2. He gained my trust so quickly into the season. He just got open, consistently made catches. He did not drop the ball. And despite his deep route running being so low, he made plays down the field like we're seeing there, a catch in traffic way down the field. I could not be more impressed with Jalen Turner. Let's not forget that he missed a decent amount of time as well. So he could have had 1,100 yards, 15 touchdowns had he not missed some time. Just an incredible season. He would have gone up to star, I believe, had he not gotten injured. He might still do it. I guess we'll just have to see, but I am excited about Jalen Turner being a long-term prospect at receiver. He's already had a more productive season than Darius Slayton ever had, despite being just normal dev and a lower rating. And I'm still looking at receiver for the next year, but more to complement Eddie Hazelton and Jalen Turner, not to replace him. I love this guy. Flipping over to the defense, let's talk about George McLean. George McLean is outstanding. 21 tackles for loss, 19.5 sacks, even threw in a pick. That was not a game that we actually watched or anything, but this guy came in and arguably is already the best defender on our football team. And the only reason I say arguably is because I think a guy we're going to talk about later, Quincy Boston, absolutely turned into a shutdown corner this year. But in terms of just the big plays, the stats, yeah, you cannot argue that George McLean is the best player on our team in the hunt for the Defensive Player of the Year. He made plays against both the pass and the run all the time. One of his first big plays there, tackling Deebo Samuel in the backfield, just that 95 strength at edge just makes such a big difference. He is a menace against the run. Despite maybe not the best block shedding ratings, strength is also really big in the run, and he's incredible. Let's talk about Timmy Reed. He had 12 sacks, and when he had a 4-sack game earlier this episode, I wanted you to remember, because before that game, he was having a very bad year. So if we just take that one game where he had 4 sacks out, he had 8 TFLs and 8 sacks in 16 games. This guy, I think, has gotten worse every year, which is crazy to say. Those first 2 years, he had 20 plus TFLs. And maybe you can say it's just because his other teammates are eating that he doesn't have enough to eat himself. Like, he still makes the occasional incredible play. Like, I compiled a whole highlight reel of him. He does make plays. But he was the least productive of our defensive linemen despite being the highest rated. He has to be one of the players that I would say did not meet my expectations. I expect him to be just as productive, if not, I expect him to be more productive, let's be honest, than Jaren Lacey. We'll get to him in a minute. And just as productive as Wyatt Costanzo, who we're going to talk about here. 12 TFLs, 13 sacks for him. Great year. Double digits in both TFLs and sacks. Despite a career low in TFLs, I'll take the, 4.5 more sacks than his previous career high. Stayed a lot more healthy this year than he has in the past, which is always good. He has a very low injury rating. But man, as a pure finesse rusher, that swim move of his is becoming lethal. He's up to like 94 acceleration, which is incredible. And I think he's a pretty decent edge 1, but considering he's now our edge 2, I love him as an edge 2. One thing to watch with him, though, he's up for contract, probably going to accept his 5th-year option so we can wait it out another year. But he does not want to re-sign with us. He wants a scheme fit, and our scheme calls for power rushers. So that's something to monitor. Jaren Lacey with an absolute breakout campaign. 14 TFLs and 16 sacks, more than double his rookie year. Second-year breakouts are not uncommon, and we definitely saw that here with Jaren Lacey. He was a menace. He had the season that I kind of expected from a player like Timmy Reed. One thing to know as maybe something to watch out for in your own Madden teams when you're developing defensive linemen, we have 3 finesse rushers on our defensive line and 1 power rusher. Timmy Reed's the power rusher, and he was the least productive. Maybe finesse is just the meta in Madden 23. But regardless, Jaren Lacey, absolutely awesome season. I loved using him. He's great. Michael Franklin had a career low in terms of tackles and tackles for loss. Just a half a sack, 1 pick. And he's someone that, basically, based off this, you'd think maybe you're disappointed. But when you play the games, I can't say I'm disappointed in Michael Franklin. I think when he was drafted, despite him being a normal dev, he was one of the best players we drafted in the first draft ever for this franchise. And I just kind of had the hopes that he would become some superstar linebacker. And I just don't think that's what he's meant to be. He has, good size and speed and maybe the potential to be a good superstar linebacker, but what he's turned into is just a really good player. And so you just have to adjust your expectations a bit, I think. Victor Giles as LB2 here. A little bit more, I'd say, of a big playmaker. More TFLs, more picks, less tackles. Got superstar last year, and he had a better season this year. Could that mean X factor for Giles? I don't know. Paid him a huge contract this offseason. And like I said, I think in terms of making a highlight reel like this, you see a lot more highlight plays from a guy like Victor Giles. He makes the big plays, maybe not quite as consistent as Michael Franklin, but I think the two of them as a tandem, as we re-sign both long-term this season, are great. You have a very sturdy, good linebacker, Michael Franklin. Then you have a guy out there making the big plays in Victor Giles. I think we have a really awesome tandem for years to come. And I have no complaints. Quincy Boston, I talked about him with George McLean a little bit. Maybe the stats don't say it so, although he had a career low in tackles. I think that's a good thing for corners. That means maybe they're not allowing as many completions. Evidenced there by his 18 deflections. I think this guy really stepped into the player that we were hoping he would be when we drafted him this year. We always knew he had the potential, right? We drafted him as a 78 overall superstar. And he was going to be our lockdown corner. And in years past, he showed glimpses of it, but he got beat on I won't say a regular basis, but not an irregular basis. This year, though, it just felt like any time he was targeted, especially downfield, he was making plays on the ball. Only 5'10", you can say, man, this guy is better in the slot, but he has more than held his own on the outside. Just saving touchdowns a bunch, saving big plays. Got a few interceptions this year, timely picks at that, and just I think he truly is in contention for the best player on this defense. He was awesome. The fact that he doesn't have the stats and probably isn't going to go to the Pro Bowl is kind of crazy to me, because I think he's a really, really good corner, up there with maybe the best in the league. Can even occasionally lay the big hit like we see there. And at least if you exclude the defensive line, he's our most important player. Just consistency more than we've ever seen with him. Just look at all these deep balls that he's targeted on that he broke up every single one. I mean, I'm not going to say he never gets beat. He will on occasion, but I mean, the speed, the abilities. This is the year that I think Quincy Boston has put his name in that shutdown corner category. Morris Morgan, his counterpart on the other side, had a very similar year to what he had last year, except for deflections. He went way down there. And when I was thinking through the season and also making this highlight reel, which took me like 5 hours, is crazy. There weren't a lot of highlights for Morris Morgan. I don't necessarily think that means that he's a bad player, but I just think he's solid. He has good size, he has the athleticism, and he's also younger into his career than Quincy Boston, despite them actually having the same age. That's kind of the risk when you draft somebody that's 23 years old. He's already he's not done developing, but he's further down in his development that I would like. And if there was, say, like a really good corner or even maybe a really good safety in the next draft, we had to replace somebody in the secondary, he is the most replaceable player, I think. JT Bean, the rookie mid-round pick, came in and had 5 picks as a rookie. One of the better pick numbers in the entire league, only 5 deflections, so it felt like he was either allowing catches or picking off balls for the most part. But I mean, he had the most picks of our corners, so you could say maybe he was the best playmaker. He also forced a fumble this year. Definitely exceeded expectations. Kind of like Jalen Turner, where I drafted him to be wide receiver 3 and he became wide receiver 2. I drafted JT Bean to be the injury replacement in our corner room, behind Caleb Bass. But he was really good right off the bat. So we just tried him out at slot over Caleb Bass, and he did not disappoint. I am very happy with his progress, to the point where, like I said, if I was replacing a corner, I would replace Morris Morgan before I replaced JT Bean. These big plays that he made probably puts him in contention for the Pro Bowl too. We saw he was number 1 in DB of the Year weeks ago. I don't think he'll remain there, but we shall see. Darius Connor. I think he's a player where maybe the stats don't tell everything. because he's a safety that really is all about the coverage. In terms of what my expectations of him are, it's hard to say that he exceeds expectations, but I don't believe he disappoints either. Looking back through the season and then making this highlight reel, you're not going to see anything that you're like, wow, Darius Connor, what a play, he's a stud. But at the same time, throughout the year, there weren't a lot of plays where I was just like, what are you doing, Darius Connor? You know what I mean? And so a guy who just does his job, is excellent in coverage, makes the plays in the run game when he needs to. I think he's just really solid. He's also a guy that's coming up for contract, and I think if he wants to return, we're probably going to pay the man. Delvin Walls. I love Delvin Walls. Those stats are decreased, I know, but you have to remember that he missed 7 games. So 66 tackles, and he tied his TFLs missing all those games. Just one less deflection, more forced fumbles, just one less pick. This guy is a playmaker, and he's our biggest hitter on the defense. He's our best defensive back when it comes to run support. You just see him making a ton of plays in space. The most dependable tackler, I think maybe even more than our linebackers. You just saw if he had somebody in his sights, they were not getting past him very often. There were times where he was a little bit of a liability in coverage, but he's still developing. He has superstar dev. He's young. He has time to get better at coverage. Already so good against the run. Honestly, if I had to rank how important the DBs are to our team, he'd rank second after Boston. Don't have highlights here for the offensive line. I guess you can go back and look at Kevon Simmons highlights if you want some offensive line highlights. But I do want to go over their stats. Eli Shea here allowed the most sacks of anyone on our offensive line by far, tied with his worst year ever. That's not what you like to see this late in his career, but he's only getting paid $5 million a year. Brian Pearson continues to get better. Just 4 sacks allowed. He's become really good, and I'm happy with what we see here. Jerome Snell has halved his sacks allowed every year, so I guess next year he's allowing 1, and then a half sack. With that kind of 0 or 1? I don't know. Cedric Gallimore allowed 1 more sack. We switched his position. I think he's our most replaceable offensive line talent. If there was like another really good guy, like someone like Rashard Younger, for example, in the draft, I think we would replace Cedric Gallimore. If I had to draft our most important offensive lineman to our least, Brian Pearson would be 1. Rashard Younger would probably be 2. Based just on the stats this year, I'd have to go Snell over Shea, although I think of them very similarly, and then Cedric Gallimore is our most replaceable. I also want to take a look at a few guys that we traded away for second-round picks recently. Devin Hamilton, we traded to the Rams. He had 28 touchdowns to 8 interceptions this year. I know we looked at his stats before the Rams game earlier. Was around the same. It was his lowest yards ever, but it was close to where he's been in the past. Also ran for 3 more touchdowns. So he had over 30 touchdowns, single digits on the turnovers. I think the Rams are happy with that. In terms of D'Angelo Brown, but we also have to remember that he missed half the year. So if you double that, like 14 TFLs, 5 sacks, that's more of like year 2 Bramble. I think the Cardinals were hoping for year 3 Bramble when they traded the second round pick for him. But maybe next year he'll be better. Darius Slayton, this was, his second best year as a pro, but the Jets were probably hoping for more when they traded the second for him. Let's take now a look at the league stats. Sean Rogers, the other rookie quarterback, led the league in passing yards. 43 touchdowns and 15 interceptions for him too. Really good. Kind of just want to take a look at all these generated quarterbacks, because I've been kind of noticing that there's a lot of really decent looking quarterbacks in this league, and that's exciting. You want, good quarterbacks that can challenge us deeper into this franchise. Guys like Eddie Shelton, who's been good. He's been a superstar. John Michaels had a ton of picks last year, still had a bunch this year too. Guys like Logan Fullen. I think the future of the league. Roseman, who went to Florida. Shout out Howie Roseman, also went to Florida, GM of the Philadelphia Eagles. Anthony Cloud missed some time, which is why he's still low on yards, but still had 41 touchdowns. He's a beast. I believe he's the highest rated generated quarterback in our league. Although Nash might be catching him really quickly. One guy over 20 picks, O'Neal of the Packers. Sam Darnold second. Why is he still starting in this league? Who had the least picks of the starters? It was Lamar Jackson. Lynch was second, but he was just a part-time starter for the Bucs while their starter was out. And then Nash, the second fewest interceptions of the full-time starting quarterbacks this year. You'd love to see it. Jonathan Taylor led the league in rushing yards. It's always been, Taylor and Henry. Henry might be falling off a little bit here. Taylor's still going strong. Simmons was second in the entire league. Najee Harris was third, but with 24 touchdowns. That's kind of nuts. And I want to see if there's any generated running backs over 1,000 yards. Just one other running back went over 1,000 yards, not named. Kevon Simmons, that's a generated player, so big drop off in terms of talent at running back. I guess there are so many good real life running backs that there's not a lot of room for, generated starters. Makes some sense. Trevor Perry, 17 touchdowns on 120 carries. That's some Jamal Williams type stuff. I know Williams gets more carries than that, but those, backup power backs for the Lions always get them touchdowns. Two receivers, both with 1,220 catches, 1,600 receiving yards. There we go. That's the right word. Eddie Hazelton towards the top of the league, ends up being 5th in receiving yards. Didn't score a lot of touchdowns though. Lewis Smart down there at 9th in the NFL, 3rd in receptions. And then take a look at the top of the league. So 12 touchdowns. Looks like tied for 10th. So Zachary Krause had more touchdowns than Lewis Smart. Okay, so basically Lewis Smart was 4th in the league for tight ends for touchdowns, but 1st in catches and yards. Tristan Wirfs, 1,100 downs with no sacks allowed. That's nuts. He's so incredibly good. At tackle, you can expect that at guard maybe, but at tackle, wow. Pierce of the Rams allowed 23 sacks. That's a lot of sacks. Patrick Queen led the league and tackles. Murray also over 140. TFL's Darius, still a generated end for the Seahawks. McLean was tied for 2nd in the league. Let's take a look at him. He's not even a run stopper. He's just a power rusher who just gets a ton of TFLs. Go still, man. In terms of sacks, Max Crosby led the league. McLean with 1 behind him, but 5 more TFLs. Who will win Defensive Player of the Year? Maybe the interception gives the edge to McLean. You never know. You see Watt and Bosa there, and then Marquestin Red. Somebody that, maybe without drafting McLean, I would have regretted not drafting because he turned in an excellent year. Welker had the most field goal makes, but he had some misses. Carlson was the best in terms of 16 for 16, no misses. Welker had the longest field goal, no surprise. He also had the most extra points, tied with Butker of the Chiefs. Us and the Chiefs, man, scoring a lot of touchdowns. Vogel ends up being 3rd in the league in punting average and net punting average, so really solid year for him. Unfortunately, he's up for contract, and since we're paying a kicker, do we want to pay both the kicker and a punter? I don't know. Hardy with 3 kickoff return touchdowns is awesome. No punt return touchdowns in the league. Let's shift our focus now to team stats. The Express had the most yards in the league by 400. In terms of passing, we were 6th in the league. The last team over 5,000 yards. The Texans in 1st. We kind of already saw that, with Rodgers leading the league in passing yards. The Express were 3rd in the league in rushing. Wow, number 1 was far away number 1. We had 5 more points per game than anyone in the league. We were 4th in the league in passing touchdowns. In terms of rushing touchdowns, we were tied for 2nd. And then first downs, we had the most first downs in the league. Switch over to defense. Allowed the fewest total yards in the league. In terms of passing, scrolling down here for a minute, we were not that great. That's what, middle of the league. I think that I stopped the count at 15th in the league against the pass. I guess teams were just passing on us a bunch because they were always down. Evidence there by how much we were leading in the run game. Also, about 60, almost 70 less points than anyone. Had 11 more sacks than the next highest team in the Cowboys. Forced the most fumbles by 1. Had the most picks by 2. A big time playmaking defense. How are we on third downs? We were top 10. Not terrible. I mean, you'd love to be 1 there. In terms of fourth down percentage, one of the bottom 10 in the league. So you'd love to be better there. Let's talk about red zone efficiency. Nowhere near the top here. We're at the bottom almost, 60%. What, that's like bottom 3rd in the league. So that's something that we can look to be better at next year. For sure. Defensive red zone efficiency, though, right there tied with first with the Buccaneers. We allowed less attempts there. In terms of penalty yardage, we're going to be way towards the bottom of the league. That's just what happens when you play the games. There's less penalties than in the simulations. Even like when you slow sim a game, I think there's less penalties than in like a just straight up simmed game. Had the best turnover differential in the league. No surprise there. Brandon Nash is the winner of MVP, kicking off our awards ceremony here. No surprise. I think he was incredible. Eli Manning, also no surprise, 15-2, coach of the year. This team was really good to end the year. Offensive player of the year is Brandon Nash. I wish you wouldn't win offensive player of the year and MVP, but I'll take the XP. McLean wins defensive player of the year over Crosby. So the +5 TFLs was enough to have 1 less sack than Crosby. Marquest and Red, of course, they're up there too. Could have been a scary duo, although, you know, I'm definitely fine with Costanzo as his counterpart. Nash wins offensive rookie of the year. Sorry for Rodgers. Almost any year he would be an offensive rookie of the year. We had the top 2 vote getters in terms of defensive rookie of the year. Also, I didn't miss that Jalen Turner was 4th in offensive rookie of the year. Brandon Nash was the best quarterback. That's no surprise. In terms of running back, Kevon Simmons was voted 4th best in the AFC. Was he in the offensive player of the year race? He was at 7th. So 4th best running back, but 7th best player. Doesn't make much sense. Nobody there. Just without the touchdowns, I guess, for Hilton. Come on, Madden. We have 2 backup linemen winning. Not winning, but getting top 5 votes in best offensive line. Madden, please fix yourself. We have 3 players in best defensive line voting. Linebacker, I don't imagine anyone will be here. It's typically a bunch of edge rushers, and we just don't get a lot of solo tackles. JT Beans ends up 3rd in best DB, so he does fall. He didn't have like a ton of big plays to end the year. He was on a hot streak when we checked, so I wasn't surprised he was number 1. I'm also not surprised he didn't finish there. Welker ends up just being voted as like an average kicker in the AFC. Let's simulate and see who we will be playing. It will be the Denver Broncos, our division rivals. We avoided them twice in the regular season, not on purpose. Definitely not scared of this team by any means. But our first playoff game in franchise history will be against the Denver Broncos. I've been working on an intro a little bit similar to this highlight reel that I showed you. So if you liked that highlight reel, drop a like on this video. I would greatly appreciate that. Also, you're probably going to like the intro I have prepared for next episode, but that will be coming out soon. We'll be playing in the playoffs, and I will see you then.